Singapore will win in 2030, not the US or China, because the world is changing in a way that rewards speed, trust, stability, smart planning, and global connection, and Singapore is built exactly for this new world. While the US and China are slowed down by size, conflict, division, and internal pressure, and this is not about who is bigger or stronger but about who works better in the modern system where money, data, talent, and ideas move fast and choose safe and efficient places, and Singapore has quietly positioned itself as the most reliable hub on Earth, a place where East meets West without drama, where rules are clear, contracts are respected, corruption is low, infrastructure works perfectly, and decisions are made fast. And in the next decade this matters more than military power or population size, because power today comes from control of finance, trade routes, technology standards, digital flows, and trust, and Singapore dominates all of these areas without making enemies. While the US is distracted by political division, debt, social conflict, and declining trust in institutions, and China is struggling with slowing growth, property crises, demographic collapse, capital controls, and rising global suspicion, and while both are still powerful, they are becoming harder places to do business, invest, and innovate freely, and companies, investors, and skilled workers are voting with their feet, choosing neutral, stable, well-run places, and Singapore is at the top of that list, because it offers something rare, a system that works exactly as promised every single day, where airports, ports, courts, banks, and digital systems run like clockwork, where the government plans decades ahead, not just election cycles, and where policies are adjusted quickly when the world changes, and this is why Singapore is winning quietly while others argue loudly. Singapore understands that in 2030 the real competition is not about ideology but about efficiency, and efficiency attracts capital, and capital attracts talent, and talent creates innovation, and innovation creates influence, and Singapore has mastered this cycle better than any country its size, turning its small land and population into an advantage, because it cannot afford mistakes, so it plans carefully, tests policies, and scales what works, and this mindset is very different from the US, where policies swing back and forth depending on elections, creating uncertainty, and very different from China, where top-down decisions can be fast but often ignore market signals and create hidden risks, and Singapore sits in the middle, combining strong government with market discipline, allowing private companies to thrive while keeping the system stable, and by 2030 this balance will be more valuable than raw power, because the world is fragmenting, supply chains are splitting, and countries want partners that are neutral, predictable, and competent, not aggressive or ideological, and Singapore has carefully built an image and reality as a trusted neutral hub, a place where American companies, Chinese companies, European companies, Indian companies, and Middle Eastern investors can all operate side by side without fear, and this makes Singapore indispensable, because when big powers cannot trust each other, they need a trusted third place, and Singapore is that place. The US still has huge strengths, but it is carrying heavy burdens into 2030, including massive government debt, aging infrastructure, political polarization, and declining confidence in public institutions, and these problems slow decision-making and reduce long-term planning, and while American innovation is strong, it is increasingly concentrated in a few areas and faces regulatory confusion and social pushback, and global partners are no longer sure if US policies will remain stable from one administration to the next, and this uncertainty pushes global money to safer, more predictable systems, and China faces even deeper structural challenges, with a shrinking workforce, rising youth unemployment, heavy local government debt, and an economy that is transitioning away from the old growth model but has not fully found a new one, and strict capital controls and data rules make global companies nervous, and geopolitical tensions make Chinese markets riskier, and as a result, money that once flowed freely into China is now looking for alternatives, and Singapore is one of the biggest winners of this shift, absorbing regional headquarters, wealth management, research centers, and high-value services that want access to Asia without the risks of being inside China. Singapore's financial system is one of the strongest in the world, and by 2030 it will be even more important, because global finance is moving toward multi-currency systems, digital assets, green finance, and complex cross-border flows, and Singapore has positioned itself at the center of all of these trends, with strong regulation that protects stability while still encouraging innovation, and this balance is extremely hard to achieve, and many countries fail at it, either allowing too much risk or blocking progress, but Singapore has shown again and again that it can manage complexity, and global banks, funds, Singapore with trillions of dollars, not because it promises high returns, but because it promises safety, transparency, and long-term thinking, and in a volatile world, safety becomes power, and by 2030 this financial influence gives Singapore leverage far beyond its size, because money shapes decisions, partnerships, and priorities across the region and beyond. Technology is another reason Singapore will win in 2030, not by trying to dominate consumer platforms like the US or manufacturing like China, but by becoming the control center for advanced systems, including artificial intelligence governance, cybersecurity, smart cities, biotech, and clean energy management. And Singapore understands that the future of technology is not just invention but regulation, standards, and integration into society, and it has invested heavily in digital government, data security, and ethical frameworks, making it a testing ground for technologies that need trust to scale globally, and companies want to test and deploy sensitive technologies in environments where rules are clear and enforcement is fair, and Singapore provides that environment, and by 2030, the country that sets standards and best practices often has more influence than the country that simply produces the most hardware or software, and Singapore is becoming a standard setter in many critical areas, quietly shaping how technology is used across Asia and beyond. Geography also plays a major role, because Singapore sits at the heart of global trade routes, and while this has always been true, it becomes even more important in a fragmented world, where supply chains are being redesigned for resilience rather than just cost, and Singapore's port and logistics systems are among the most advanced in the world. Integrating physical trade with digital tracking, finance, and risk management, and as companies diversify supply chains away from over-reliance on one country, Singapore acts as the coordination hub, managing flows between Southeast Asia, South Asia, East Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, and this gives it strategic importance that neither the US nor China can easily replace, because trade does not just need producers and consumers, it needs trusted connectors, and Singapore has mastered this role, turning connectivity into influence. Another key reason Singapore will win in 2030 is human capital, because the future belongs to places that can attract and retain the best minds, and Singapore has built a system that rewards skill, discipline, and contribution, offering high quality of life, safety, education, healthcare, and global access, and while it is strict, it is also fair and efficient, and for many professionals, entrepreneurs, and researchers, this combination is extremely attractive, especially compared to the uncertainty, social tension, or restrictions they may face elsewhere, and Singapore's universities, research institutions, and corporate ecosystems are deeply connected to the global network, allowing ideas to flow in and out freely, and by 2030, talent mobility will be one of the most important sources of power, and Singapore is one of the best places in the world at converting global talent into national strength. Singapore also benefits from strong regional integration, because Southeast Asia is one of the fastest-growing regions in the world, with a young population, rising incomes, and increasing digital adoption, and Singapore is the gateway to this region, providing capital, expertise, legal frameworks, and coordination, and as ASEAN becomes more important globally, Singapore's role as its financial and strategic hub grows automatically, and unlike the US and China, which often dominate their regions in ways that create resistance, Singapore leads by enabling others, not controlling them, and this cooperative model builds goodwill and long-term partnerships, which matter more in a multipolar world than command and control power. The political system of Singapore is another advantage in the context of 2030, because it prioritizes competence, continuity, and long-term planning, and while it is not loud or dramatic, it delivers results, and global actors value results more than rhetoric, especially in uncertain times, and Singapore's leaders focus on practical solutions, data-driven policy, and future readiness, investing in education, climate adaptation, digital infrastructure, and social stability, and this forward looking governance contrasts sharply with the reactive politics seen in many large countries, and by 2030, countries that planned early for climate risks, aging populations, and technological disruption will be far ahead of those that delayed action, and Singapore is already years ahead in these areas. Climate resilience is another area where Singapore gains influence, because climate change is becoming a central economic and security issue, and Singapore has invested heavily in adaptation, water security, energy efficiency, and sustainable urban design, turning vulnerability into expertise, and as other cities and countries face rising seas, extreme weather, and resource stress, Singapore exports knowledge, systems, and solutions, strengthening its role as a global problem solver, and problem solvers gain respect and influence, not through force, but through usefulness, and this kind of influence is durable and welcomed, unlike coercive power. By 2030, the world will not be run by one superpower, but by networks, hubs, and systems, and Singapore is one of the most important hubs in this emerging order, connecting finance, trade, technology, talent, and governance, and while the US and China will remain major players, they will increasingly depend on neutral, efficient, and trusted nodes to keep the global system functioning. And Singapore is one of the few places that both sides can work with, invest in, and rely on without fear, and this gives Singapore quiet but real power, the kind that shapes outcomes behind the scenes rather than dominating headlines, and history shows that such power often lasts longer than loud dominance. Singapore will not win by replacing the US or China, but by outworking them in the areas that matter most in the modern world, by being faster, cleaner, smarter, and more reliable, and by 2030, in a world tired of chaos, conflict, and uncertainty, these qualities will matter more than size or strength, and that is why Singapore will emerge as one of the most influential winners of the next decade, not because it shouts the loudest, but because it delivers consistently, quietly, and effectively. Every single day.